Hi guys, this is Mrs. Dowell. I hope everyone is doing well. Today we are going to be talking about narrative writing. This is not new for you guys. This is something that you guys have been working on in the Learning Center. But today we're going to start a new piece of writing and we're going to go from there. So what I'd like to do is just to kind of just remind ourselves what narrative writing is. And then we're going to go into looking at a prompt and then begin our writing using a graphic organizer. So we're going to plan our writing today. So at the end of today, your job is to use the graphic organizer and write your own story filling out the graphic organizer. I'm going to do an example for you using the same prompt, and then we'll go from there. All right. So let's just make ourselves remember what a narrative piece of writing looks like. So narrative writing describes a story. We're showing, we're not telling, and I'll go into more details in later. But if you remember correctly, I don't want to just tell the story. I want to show the story. I want to make sure that the reader is interested, that they're engrossed in the story. It describes an event in a sequence. So it's taking those small seed stories that we've talked about and turning it into a story that shows sequence, kind of like the beginning, the middle, and the end. A narrative piece of writing has setting and it has characters. So the setting, you're going to describe for me where you're at, what you see, what you feel, what you maybe taste. So it's using some of those five senses. It's going to have characters. Now, if you're writing a personal narrative or a realistic narrative is going to have real people, real characters that are talking. But if you remember, an imaginative narrative can have make-believe things happening. It could have animals that are talking, that are your characters in your story. So it doesn't always have to be people. It can be, different types of characters as well. We also know that a narrative piece of writing has a clear beginning, it has a clear middle, and it has a clear end. So these are where your paragraphs are going to come into and why it's going to be very important that you plan your writing. Narrative writing also uses transition words, and I'm going to have a slide for that, but I'm also going to put up on Google Classroom a graphic organizer that has different transition words. So you normally would have had those transition words in your red binder or your red folder, but I'll make sure that I add that to Google Classroom. And then narrative writing also uses dialogue. So the characters are speaking. Again, this is showing, not telling. You're not telling me what the character said, you're showing me that they're talking. Okay. So let's take a second and go back into what show, don't tell is. So if you remember correctly, we talked about and how a lot of times we will say, Brian was angry, he started to yell. That's telling me that Brian is angry and that he's yelling. But if I'm showing you that Brian is angry, I would say Brian pursed his lips, which means that he put his lips together and clenched his fists into balls. Try as he might, he could not contain himself. Within seconds, he erupted like a volcano. So I know Brian is angry because he's pursing his lips together and he's clenching his fists into tight balls. I know when someone's angry, I know when I get angry, I tend to get hot. But Brian here, he's clenching his fists into tight balls. He's pursing his lips together. He's putting his lips together into a tight form. Then he started to yell. Well, how do I know that he yelled? Because he erupted like a volcano. That puts a picture in my mind that a volcano just spits out very quickly and it's very loud and vivacious. Well, that shows me that Brian was super angry and I can just hear him yelling. Okay. If you look at the next example, it just says Bailey was happy. Well, oftentimes that's what I see a lot in our writing. Oh, so and so was happy. Well, I want us to show me that she was happy. So, for example, a gigantic grin spread across Bailey's face, and her eyes lit up like the sky on the 4th of July. Well, I don't have to tell you that Bailey was happy. I can show it to you. I know that she's happy because she's got a gigantic grin, which is a big smile that's across her entire face. I also know that she's happy because her eyes are lit up. And I have a visual in my head like the sky on the 4th of July. I know that the 4th of July has a bunch of fireworks going off, and I can just see those, my eyes being bright and big with the fireworks kind of bouncing off my eyes and the light going off. Now I know she's happy because of that. So I'm showing, not telling. Okay, we've talked about this. We have a poster in our room of us doing it. So try to visualize that. But here's an example again. Now here's those transition words. Remember, we can show that time in sequence by saying later, after, before, then, next. We can use those similes and those comparison when I'm, such as, if, equally, similar, like, in the same way. We can show direction and place by saying here, there, over there, beyond, under, to the left, in the distance. So you want to make sure that you're using those transition words. And again, I'll put up it in Google Classroom so you can access your stuff that you would have had in your folders. All right, so let's go on to our prompt. So the prompt says, you pass a door every day. It is always locked. One day you pass the door, it is unlocked. You open the door and walk inside. Write to tell what happens when you open the door and walk inside. So that is what you're going to be writing about. So how are you going to be graded? So you will be graded on how well you develop your story. Does your story have a beginning, middle, and end? Is there a lesson to be learned in the story? Is there a problem in the story? How do the characters solve their problem? You're going to be graded using vocabulary and dialogue. Have you included sensory details? We've got that poster up in our room. Try to visualize it. The poster of the sensory details that talks about touch, smell, taste, hear, and things that you see. Are the characters talking? Have you shown how your characters are feeling? Remember, you're showing me what they're feeling. You're not telling me that they're excited. You're showing me that they're excited. You're going to be graded on your spelling and punctuation. Are your words spelled correctly? Do they have complete sentences? Do your sentences begin with different words? Remember, you're not going to always just say and, or then. Do you have capitals and ending punctuation? And then lastly, are you using those transition words? So that's how you're going to be graded. Okay. Remember, your prompt is you pass a door every day. It is always locked. One day you pass the door and it's unlocked. You open the door and you walk inside. Write to tell what happens when you open the door and walk inside. So I created my own graphic organizer so I can explain to you how, remembering how to fill this out. Okay, you filled this out before, but again, part of our writing process is that we have to plan our writing. So, Mrs. Dowell, I'm the author, and the theme is narrative writing. So the first thing I'm going to think about in my narrative writing is the setting and the characters. So the setting is, I'm going to say it's the last day of school and it's play day. Now you can have this anywhere. You could have this story happen at home. You can have this door happen outside in the middle of the road. You could have this door happen in the mall. You could have this door at church. It could be anywhere that you'd want this door to happen to be, but just tell me where it's at. For me, I'm going to have it at school, and it's the last day of school, so I'm even being more specific. And I'm going to say that it's play day. I'm going to have us asking to go to the restroom, and we come across a door that is open. And my characters in my story are going to be myself and some of my friends, whose names are Amy, Tracy, and Michelle. So, what is the problem in my story? The problem is when we walk in the door, we notice that we are in the mountains, and the door will no longer let us go back to school. That's a big problem. So, our goal is to get back to school. Notice that I don't have a title for my story yet. I kind of want to fill out my graphic organizer because filling it out helps me kind of think about my story as I'm going. And by the time I get to the very end of my graphic organizer, I'll have a title in mind, but I don't have one in mind yet. So I'm not quite sure where I'm going with my story yet. All right, so let's go to the beginning, the middle, and end of my story. Now remember, this is just my planning. So this is more of me telling right now. This is telling what's happening in the beginning, telling what's happening in the middle, and telling what's happening at the end. When I go to write my paragraphs, which is a paragraph for the beginning, a paragraph for the middle, a paragraph for the end, that's where I'm going to show. But right now, I'm just kind of telling my story. So in the beginning, it's the last day of school and it's play day. We're not really following directions and we ask to go to the restroom. And as we are walking, we notice that the door is normally locked, is unlocked. So we decide to go in and see what's in the room. We walk into the door and find ourselves in a forest. So I'm just setting up my story in the beginning. Okay. Now, what happens in the middle of my story? When we walk in, we try to go back, but the door is just a door and does not let us go back to school. And a bear, because we're in the forest, begins to chase us. But we notice in the trees, or we hear a noise in the trees, and it's a rabbit who says that he wants to help us find our way home. Okay, so that is the middle of my story. Now, what happens at the end of my story? The rabbit tells us to follow the road to the forest to the top of the mountain. We follow the road, and the rabbit stays with us, although he is hidden in the trees. We get to the top, and the bear is there. We scream, and we do not know what to do. So I haven't given my resolution yet, how the story ends, even though that this is the end, I'm getting to the solution on how I'm going to get back home. Okay. Now I'm going to give my resolution. So the bear ends up speaking and tells us that we need a key to the door at the top of the mountain. We end up thanking him and we open the door. And we end up back at school and no time has passed. So what's the lesson in my story? That even when things look scary, such as the bear, they might actually be helpful and not scary at all. Because what ends up happening, the bear ends up helping us get back home. So now I can go back to the beginning with my title. And I'm going to think that my title is The Bear in the Woods, because it's kind of based off of the lesson of the bear being scary in the beginning, but ends up being super helpful at the end. So now that my graphic organizer is filled out, now it's going to be your turn. Okay, so I want you to fill out your graphic organizer. I want you to remember that you are doing it based off of this prompt. You pass the door every day. It is always locked. One day you pass the door and it is unlocked. You open the door and walk inside. Write to tell what happens when you open the door and you walk inside. Okay, so remember, your story can take place wherever you want. Okay, try not to do it like my story. Try to make up your own story, but you can use mine as a reference. Okay, I can't wait to see all your graphic organizers. I can't wait to see them. So I'm excited to read all about your stories and what happens on the other side of the door. All right, guys, happy writing.